Cool. Well, I think we've got the really committed hardcore of antitrust aficionados in the room here. So well done for staying the course. And thank you for joining this sort of final session of today's conference. So it's entitled Learning from the Past or Generals Fighting the Last War, How to Harness the Next Wave of Innovation. And so the motivation for this is that, 2024 was a year where many of the kind of competition issues of the Web 2.0 era sort of took steps towards resolution. So we've had the end of the Google shopping saga in the courts, for example. The DMA is starting to bite. We're seeing actual changes in the market, as we discussed earlier today. And so those issues of the kind of consumer tech, digital era, they're not done and dusted, but they're perhaps starting to move into the rearview mirror. And the idea for this panel was to end the conference and the year by asking, well, what comes next, particularly in the tech space? So motivating that, there's obviously a sense that Web 2.0 didn't go very well for competition policy, that multiple markets tipped to high levels of concentration, that antitrust didn't do that much to improve outcomes in those markets that did tip, that European firms did not do or participate as much in this wave of innovation as perhaps they had done in previous waves, and that ultimately it all took a very long time. So the question is, how then should competition policy react to the coming wave of new technologies? Are there lessons to be learned from that previous Web 2.0 era? And if so, what are they? And conversely, would we be making a sort of category error if we were to assume that the next wave of technology will have the same economic features as the ones we lived through? So I'm happy to say that we've got a panel here who can tackle those questions. And even for those of you who've sat through a few dozen conference sessions on generative AI, I'm confident that this group can tell you something new that you haven't heard before. So first of all, we have Maxime Cohen, who's the Scale AI Chair of Data Science at McGill, the Chief AI Officer at ELNA Medical. He's an academic researcher at the intersection of data science and operations management, and has experience, at the coalface of integrating AI and other technologies at firms as diverse as Google, Microsoft, Uber, IBM, Spotify, L'Oreal, and Staples. He's also testifying on AI-related and technology-related issues in the US courts. Second, we have Sofia Rodrigues. She's on the board of the Portuguese Competition Authority, previously the chief economist there. The ADC, I think, was one of really the first agencies out of the blocks when it comes to looking at competition issues in generative AI. Third, we have Hans Zenger, head of unit at the CT at DG Comp. We were negotiating over what was the right adjective to refer to him, and we came up with a titan of antitrust enforcement, so I'm going to try that. You can put it on your LinkedIn bio straight afterwards. I hope to see that. And he's obviously worked across a huge number of cases on mergers and antitrust in the technology sector and elsewhere, superbly placed to comment on these issues and what comes next. And then finally, we have Emilio Calvano, professor of economics at Toulouse. He's been publishing research on AI in really the top economics journals for more than 5 years, which is a sort of lifetime, I know, an epoch in this space, given how quickly he's moving. And he's also the principal investigator on a European Research Council project to study the impact of AI on competition. Before I kick off, start with a few disclaimers. So I'm advising Microsoft on its partnerships and the Inflection acquihire, which we'll come on to later. I've also worked on other cases in the tech space, including cases adverse to Google and Meta. So without further ado, Maxime, one of the criticisms I've heard of conference panels on new technologies, and particularly AI, is that you have a bunch of lawyers and economists kind of in marketing mode, and with no offense to the rest of our panel, a bunch of sort of pointy-headed academics and regulators who don't really understand how to use this technology in practice. So I'm delighted to say that, your presence here sort of insulates us from that criticism. And could you maybe just give that view from the coalface? So how are you seeing businesses use these new technologies? What's happening, basically?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you for having me. I apologize in advance. My voice is totally lost. I've been teaching more than 35 hours of learning and executive trainings for the last 5 days, so I pay a price now. So I always like to start by the fact that, I've been doing AI for almost 15 years, and like a few years ago, no one cared about it. I would have never been invited in such a panel. And in the last 2 years, definitely since ChatGPT came to the market, we saw definitely a change of mind where AI became like a core topic everywhere, not only for governments, but also for investors and for startups and so on. So, which brings me to the first point I would like to make, which there is an important distinction between predictive and prescriptive AI, which has been the dominant part of AI, and generative AI, which is the one that we see because it's very easy, it's very impactful, it's everywhere. Now, definitely AI has been there for a long time, and today it's everywhere, it's inevitable. We see it in our daily lives in many facets, and we see many use cases and applications, so definitely healthcare has been one of them, but also retail, entertainment, boosting productivity, which has been one of my favorites. But it all starts with the data, so definitely like the more data you have, the better AI you can do. And what I observed by working with several companies, there is always a big disconnect between managers and executives who want to do a lot of cool things with AI. And when you talk to the engineers on the ground, they say that we don't have data readiness to do those type of use cases. And big part of my consulting activities was to educate and to bridge the gap between those two teams inside the company. You have executives who hear about cool use cases, but have no clue about the data readiness, what is possible, what is feasible, and you have people on the ground who are struggling with just structuring the data in a source that we can understand what's going on to have a reasonable input to do the AI. Now, going back to your question, definitely several use cases where I've been personally involved and I was impressed. First one is in healthcare. In my opinion, the biggest impact of AI today is in the healthcare system. I recently became a Canadian citizen, and I'm very proud of it as a French citizen to become also a Canadian citizen. But one thing I'm not proud is the healthcare system in Canada. It's a total disaster. I mean, definitely in Europe, you guys are in a much better stage, but I'm cautiously optimistic that AI can really help change the picture and improve the healthcare system. Larger access, better diagnostic, like less waiting time, and so on and so forth. And I believe AI for healthcare is just at the beginning. It's just literally the infancy. And one of the use cases I was personally involved in the last few months that I'm very, very optimistic about the impact is an AI medical scribes. So what we did, we reached out to many doctors, we interviewed them, and we asked, what are the main pain points on your daily job? And I was very surprised that 85% of the doctors claimed that the biggest pain point on a daily job is to take medical notes. After each patient encounter, the doctor will have to summarize the consultation inside the EHR, the electronic health record, and that will take between 3 and 5 minutes depending on the symptoms, the length of the visit, and so on. Now, doctors have different techniques. Some of them like to dictate, some of them like to hire a human scribe, some of them like to batch several notes and wait until the end of the day to do all the summaries. But then they have to remember all the details, they have to do it, and it's a precious time, and they hate it. Now, the good news is really helped to the rescue here. And we did a pilot with AI medical scribes, which is a microphone, an ambient microphone, sitting in a room, recording the consultation. Obviously, you have a lot of privacy issues, so all the PI information is deleted on the fly, nothing sensitive is stored on the cloud, and then at the end of the consultation, it automatically generates a consultation note, a summary of the consultation, within seconds. Now the physician can look at this note, do a couple of final touches to improve it, and then the system will constantly learn as a feedback loop what is the style of the doctor, what type of notes they like to take, what type they don't like. And we did a very large-scale pilot with more than 10,000 notes, and we compared the human-generated notes, the AI-generated notes. So not only we save around 3.5 minutes per patient encounter, which is a massive impact, meaning that each doctor can see between 3 and 5 additional patients per day. So it's really a big impact in terms of access, but we were surprised that also the impact was very good in terms of the quality of the notes. Doctors are making a lot of mistakes in those notes. AI also is making mistakes. There is hallucination issue and so on. It's not perfect. But we're surprised to see that the accuracy was actually higher or at least as good as the humans. On top of it, the patients were also very, very pleasantly surprised to the fact that the doctor was able to focus more on them, to listen to them more carefully, and not to focus on taking notes and just worry about to do the notes after the consultation. So in my opinion, this is a use case where we see a very clear value. Doctors are happy, the system is happy, everybody is benefiting. Now, I have a lot of other examples. I've been working with accounting firms to also streamline the workflow, save a ton of time, boost productivity. You all heard about coding assistants. Now I don't know anyone who writes code as a living who doesn't use AI on a daily basis. And the last case that I was involved that was also blown my mind is in marketing. To literally deploy a marketing campaign, it used to take many weeks, takes a lot of time, a lot of budget to take pictures, to prepare the text, to prepare the deployment of the campaign, newsletters, blog posts, and so on. Today, AI has literally sped up the process by at least 10 to 50 times. So it's definitely a big impact on how you can generate marketing campaigns at ease, at no cost for anybody that wants to do it. So that would be a good summary of potential use cases that I saw affecting our world.
Cool. So two things. So two reactions. So first, we're going to be talking about competition and the supply chain. So it'd be useful just to get a sense of like what models are you using? Are you using open source? Are you using APIs? Are you kind of experimenting with different models? How's that process looking? And then second, probably harder question is, you know, one of the sort of stereotypes when a new technology comes out is you kind of start with improving what you know. So the steam engine comes out, and it's like, how can I make a better cloth spinning machine in my mill? And the real changes come later, when there's more fundamental shifts in what this technology can do. So it sounds a bit like that's where we are at the moment, that it's sort of finding little discrete tasks that a doctor's doing and automating them. But what's the, you know, where could we be in the next decade? Are we going to be talking about, you don't need a doctor at all, you just talk to the AI, and yeah, where's all of this heading?
No, I really like this question. So to me, like it's, as I said, just at its beginning, its infancy, we're going to see much more improvements. We see already a big disruption in drug discovery. So drug discovery is totally disrupted all the way. So definitely, like, we're going to see a huge, huge impact. Drugs are going to be discovered much faster, at a much higher pace. And we're going to discover through processes that could have not been possible without AI. We're going to really think outside the box, bring a lot of new discovery steps in a process that will be able to hopefully cure disease that were harder. Another example I really like to show in healthcare is rare disease. If you look at rare disease, and I'm not a physician by training, but some disease is 1 in 80 millions. So when you ask a physician, hey, how many times or how many instances in your career you saw this specific disease, they will most of the time tell you 0, or one physician will tell you once. But if you have an AI system trained on tens of billions of records, for 1 in 80 million, you're going to see it a few hundred times. And therefore, the AI can be much more performing at detecting potentially early signs of very rare disease because of the training data it can collect and generate and compute. Now, in terms of answering the question in 10 years, to me, like, I'm asked this question a lot, and to me, there are 3 use cases that I believe are going to really transform the world as you know it. One is, as I said, drug discovery. The second one is, indeed, AI-assisted physicians, AI-assisted nurses. There is a company called Hippocratic AI in the US that is already offering this concept of super nurses, which is fairly amazing. It's 24/7 access to a nurse, trained on all the medical records of the patients. And now we see also a big development in AI-assisted therapists. There is a big shortage of therapists in most developed countries, and AI can definitely help. It cannot really replace therapists, but at least it can really help save a lot of time and provide some assistance. And the third one that I think is going to be, it's already there, but it's going to be even more in a few years, is this concept of hyper-personalization at a very, very large scale. If we have a lot of data, very granular about each one of us, you can potentially personalize everything. It can be personalized medicine, it can be personalized marketing, it can be personalized pricing, you name it. And that, I think, is going to be like one of the big advancements. Everything is going to be highly personalized. Of course, there are many challenges that come with this hyper-personalization.
Cool, so a lot going on, a lot of interesting stuff still to happen. And so that's sort of really occurring at the bottom of the supply chain. So I guess, thinking of for Anna and then later in the conversation, you, Hans, as regulators, you've got to try and sort of map these developments to a supply chain kind of that we can understand and kind of analyze. And, how are you there? And then you've got to try and find where the potential pockets of problems could be. We've spoken potentially about the role of certain kind of structured data sets as being important. So maybe, Anna, starting with you, I think this audience will have heard the spiel about the high-level supply chain, data, compute, expertise. But could you kind of just talk us through that and maybe just identify where you see some of the pinch points in that supply chain?
Sure, thank you, Ollie, and thank you to the CRA for the invitation. It has been an amazing day. I found all the panels earlier extremely interesting. Given that you have provoked antitrust enforcers by picturing them as detached from real world, I must say that since we started looking at Gen AI, and given that this is a common criticism, I think I've seen in front of my eyes over 300 applications of Gen AI. So I cannot maybe compete with Maxime, but I can add a few. For example, Gen AI-powered college tutors, or Gen AI assisting shifts, changes in nurses, or in recruitment procedures, just going through all the applications and producing reports, or in speeding up immigration documents. And that is all being applied. It's not like theoretical applications. It's applications that, as I was looking in order not to fall into that box of the detached enforcer that I have come across. Now, indeed, since the very beginning, the approach of antitrust enforcers to this sector has been to focus on the Gen AI stack, from its inputs, enablers, or building blocks, to the products and services through which the AI model, Gen AI models, are made available to consumers. And this is interesting because it has been prompted by the fact that there's a lot of big tech players that already have significant presence along many of these stages of the value stack. And the fact that there's the risk that these bottlenecks are controlled by some of the big tech players, that might create a situation, a scenario in which they're able to pick the winners and the losers of this innovation game, and their objectives might not necessarily be aligned with those of consumers or the society in general. Now, at the core of the generative AI sector are foundation models, and as you mentioned, Ollie, everybody knows that in order to develop and implement these models, you need data, compute, and talent. Data because these models are fed with large volumes of training data. They're in pre-training, typically data that has been subject to heavy pre-processing. And the data is key for the model to learn new patterns. And the scale during training is key in order to make sure that the model generalizes very well across different uses. Now, the richness of this training data directly impacts on the performance of the model. And this is particularly true in long-tail prompts, which are those very specific prompts that individually very few people make, but collectively represent a big share of the total prompts. And it is particularly in these long-tail prompts that AI models tend to veer outside familiar territory and start producing output errors such as hallucinations in LLMs. Now, one thing that we can understand already is that generative AI models are going to differentiate by their reliability in long-tail prompts, and that might sound quite familiar if you think of search engines. And this means that they are going to live and die by the data they are trained on. And that is why in October, at the Portuguese Competition Authority, we published a short AI issues paper zooming in on data as a follow-up for our November 2023 wider report. Not only because data is so important, but because in the few months that followed since the end of last year, we've seen a lot of developments in terms of how risks, in terms of foreclosure or access, were going to take shape regarding data. You knew that regarding the other inputs, but for data that was not as clear. And why? Because earlier on, these models were being trained with public data. But as IP holders started demanding compensation for the rights of their content, and as you saw, a lot of lawsuits being put forward regarding unauthorized use of copyright material, you saw that AI model developers reacted in two ways. First, they became quite obscure about the training data that they were using for their models, and they started entering into data partnerships with publishers such as the Financial Times or Le Monde, with stock video and image repositories like Shutterstock, or social networks such as Reddit. And some of these deals have reached hundreds of millions of dollars. Reddit, for example, has announced that it had secured over $200 million in total with such deals. And then also, platforms may increase data collection. In May 2024, Meta announced its plans to use Instagram and Facebook posts in order to train its future AI models. And then also, more interestingly, and for me, maybe more consequential, is the fact that increasingly you see these models performing, particularly the chatbots, performing more and more A/B testing and collecting a lot of feedback on the users. Just to give you an example, yesterday as I was traveling, I asked Copilot, I asked Copilot for a suggestion of a music to listen to. And Copilot gave me the suggestion, but in the end asked me what music was I listening to more recently. So this interactive conversational experience with users offers boundless opportunities in order of in collecting data on users. So this shift from public to proprietary data is one of the issues. Then, of course, you need compute. You can either develop your own infrastructure, and we know that market to be concentrated with NVIDIA taking a very prominent position, or given the high cost of building the own infrastructure, most AI developers turn to contracts with cloud computing. And that makes them extremely dependent on their upstream suppliers like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, which in turn had a head advance in this race for AI. The third major input is talent, specialized personnel, which we know to be scarce. And there the main concern is on the risk of non-compete, restrictive off-boarding agreements, or no-poach clauses, which might restrict our ability to have knowledge externalities materializing, and they might hamper innovation. And it's not difficult to see why when you look, for example, at the fact that the closest competitors, or some of the closest competitors to OpenAI, are Anthropic and Perplexity, which both were created by former employees of OpenAI. Then moving further down the value chain, the key point there is access to foundation AI models. And there, which is actually the focus of our most recent short issues paper that we published just last week, and there, of course, you have a gradient of openness that go from fully closed models to fully open models. And what we do in the issues paper is highlight that even for open source, there are sometimes limitations on the commercial usage. For example, OpenAI has a threshold above which you need to ask for access for a license, or there might be limitations on how you use the output generated from those models in order to train new models. And finally, of course, the last bottleneck is how all these models are integrated into the existing products and services that are markets where many big players, big tech players, have important positions, and that are the markets through which these products are available to consumers. And there, the concerns with bundling, self-preferencing, tying kick in. Thank you.
Cool. So it's interesting here because I guess if we're thinking about kind of looking back to the past wave and how much reads across, there's obviously elements which sound a bit familiar. You know, we've got elements of data feedback loops, scale economies. There's perhaps network effects could start to play in some use cases. But I guess the really kind of $1 million question, or $1 billion maybe, because we're talking about AI, is like, how does this all net out? Is this going to be a market which is going to tend towards like a really winner-takes-all outcome? Or is it going to be we're going to have multiple differentiated people at different price points and one model saying, okay, I'm trained on this proprietary data set, someone else is trained on another. So what's the sort of end state we think we're going to get to? And obviously it's a tricky one, but maybe Emilio, if you could kind of speak about how you see, what are the economic features, where might they be pushing towards, and how does this situation compare with what we've seen before?
Right, so thank you very much. Thank you, CRA, for organizing this fantastic conference and this great panel. I've been thinking quite a bit about the economics of AI, and so thinking about really, what's new? Is this like old wine in a new bottle, or is there anything new? And so what I'll try to do in the next 10 minutes or so is thinking in relative terms, okay? So big tech versus AI. And I think there are two ways to think about this question. So the first way is to really think about familiar challenges, okay? So thinking about things that we collectively learned and that we can apply now to this new industry. And then the question there is just those factors, what's their significance or relevance in this world? Or you could think about new challenges, okay, things that are entirely idiosyncratic to this technology. Okay, so let me start with part one, which is those familiar challenges. So what have we been talking about when we talk about big tech? We've been talking about, for instance, barriers to entry, right? So as an issue, technological barriers, patents, feedback loop data, right? And I still remember, chatting with this executive of Bing saying that, Microsoft Bing saying, hey, Emilio, even if we were to hire overnight the entire search team at Google, we wouldn't be able tomorrow to provide that quality of search results simply because we don't have traffic, okay? That's the world that we were living in. Those were like real and are real barrier to entry that, many believe are not there with this new technology, in the sense that, I'm just gonna give you an anecdote. X.AI developed in 9 months a foundation model in that layer of the stack that went from 0 to top 5 in terms of performance, okay? And at the same time, it developed a cloud service, a compute facility that's now considered among, if not the best, among the most powerful compute facilities. And that happened in 5 months, despite the shortages of chips and so on and so forth. So these are kind of anecdotes that say that the factors that are central here, those barriers are different, and we talked a little bit about talent. Okay, so human capital is very important here, and so there should be a shift of focus towards that. And then, of course, deep pockets, right? So you need a lot of money to be able to amass compute resources at this scale in that a short amount of time. The data feedback loop, so is less central. Personal data, it depends on the application, okay? So sometimes personal data is very, very important. Sometimes it is not. The other thing that we've been talking about are those anti-competitive conducts. Remember, killer acquisitions, acqui-hires, bundling, tying, defaults, all those sorts of things. Those still apply to this industry as well. We should still pay attention. But the good news is that we are equipped to deal with that. We now have new tools to deal with that. And so we are in a better position than we were, when we started thinking about big tech. I have 3 special mentions, though. These are kind of conducts that I haven't seen. So they're kind of, I haven't seen as diffuse as they are now. So one is these strategic defensive vertical integration attempts with, say, everybody in the industry along the stack recognizing that there's going to be a bottleneck somewhere and nobody wants to not be the bottleneck input supplier. So Google kind of scrambling to provide the next generation of GPUs, where NVIDIA kind of, struggling to provide the next foundation model and so on and so forth. Open source is a nice development. So some of these players, they decided precisely because they wanted to avoid one player to be a bottleneck supplier, they decided to give away billions of dollars, literally giving away billions of dollars in parameters to be able to make this landscape more competitive. So here we're talking about industry players, that are trying to increase competition along the vertical stack. And then another kind of special mention goes to these kind of tying arrangements, what I call conditional financing. So this idea that venture capitalists, or some of these firms might say, hey, we're going to give you a lot of money, but only if you build something that uses our cloud infrastructure, that uses our architecture, and so on and so forth. So conditioning that money on basically locking one technology into one particular ecosystem is something which is more diffuse now. Okay. New challenges. Okay. Let me say up front what the punchline is here is that we are flying blind, over these new challenges. So the first kind of characteristic of AI that singles it out is that it's fast. It develops incredibly fast. The industry life cycle, it's much, much faster than anything we've seen, So some companies, I told you, in a couple of months, you can go from zero, literally no company, to top five model. ChatGPT went in 2 years from 0 to 300 million users. I haven't seen anything like this before. And so that's going to have, many, many implications on many, many domains, right? Think about, what this is going to imply for, those workforces that are affected and so on and so forth. AI is subtle. Thinking about conducts, conducts that can be put in place by these algorithms, these are going to be hard to detect, sophisticated. Let me give you an example. So today, Antonio Rangel was talking about behavioral biases that, companies learned over time to exploit. So they were literally thinking about, say, somebody at Google reading a bunch of research by his lab and thinking about ways to exploit those behavioral biases to make people click. Now, AI is going to put this on steroids. Now, think about a reinforcement learning algorithm, which is instructed to maximize the click-through rate. Now, what this algorithm is going to do is going to exploit behavioral biases that not even Antonio knows. Because that's how they work. They work through reinforcement. So if they find something that works, they don't question why that is working. They just, pursue it. So that's new. And it's also naive. That's kind of the naive being that there is no intent here to harm. So you set an objective, and they're going to pursue that objective, and that could lead to trouble down the road. One thing that I say, I teach, this economics of AI course, and all my students come in and think about it is going to be super sophisticated, and then the first thing that they say is, AI is dumb. It's not intelligent. It's actually dumb. Why is dumb? I mean, these are statistical models that are basically designed to say, just to give you an example, personalize the news feed of X users, Twitter users, for billions of users in real time. So the idea is that in real time, they have to estimate your preferences. They have to figure out the quality of tweets that are coming out there, and they have to start serving the right content to you. That's a daunting task. So the only way you can get this done is by using a blunt tool, something that, is not designed to estimate preferences and to rank objects, but something that is doing grosso modo a good job, which means that typically these tools, they can do mistakes. 2 examples. Suppose you're on Amazon, and for some reason, Amazon is trying to personalize those search results pages. Suppose that for some reason, at some point, Amazon believes that there is one product which is better than the others, right? When it is not, So the idea being there are 2 products which have pretty much the same quality, but the algo starts, pushing the first one just because, some people clicked on a like button at the very beginning of this cycle, right? that is a problem. It's also a competition problem because you could be a manufacturer that says, hey, the reason why I'm not selling is not because my product is bad, it's because, the algorithm is not doing its job, right? Example number 2, something that I've been working on. Suppose that you have sellers, we're still on a marketplace, and these sellers, they delegate their pricing to some automated tool. Now, suppose that this tool doesn't work. Okay, so these tools, delegating pricing, it's delegating competition, right? So you're delegating a strategic choice. And one thing that could happen is that these tools, they miserably fail to learn to compete. Okay, and I remember looking at time series of prices at the very beginning of my journey into algorithmic pricing, where you would see a lot of cycling and you would see a lot of patterns that were really kind of hard to rationalize, if not that these algorithms are just not working. Okay, so these are planned tools that might not work, right? AI so it can be done. AI is a black box, right? So we don't understand, we see the inputs, we see the output, but we don't understand how this works. Now there is this concept of explainability, so we're kind of making progress in that respect, but that's an issue. It's an issue for us, it's an issue for an enforcer. How can you possibly document bias by looking at a black box, right? That's a difficult thing to do. AI is a GPT, so it's one of these kind of disruptive technologies that, so let me use the right definition. They're widely used across sectors. They're capable of ongoing technical improvement, and they enable innovation in application sectors. Okay, this is very important because one thing that AI could do as a general purpose technology is it might disrupt, other industries. It might reduce market power, entrenchment in other industries, right? And so like the obvious example being, think about, your online journey starting with, a chatbot saying, hey, chatbot, why don't you look, up this for me? That clearly is going to be a problem for, Google search, and it's going to kind of disrupt the advertising industry because they're not going to get you, right? This is going to be a filter between you and the ads, so we're going to see developments there. AI is manipulative by design. These are tools that are meant to manipulate your choices, and it's not clear to me what is the right benchmark. What does it mean not to manipulate when you're actually designing tools that are meant to do that? AI shapes incentives, right? So think about the old world in which firms were designing products to seduce consumers. Think about the new world in which firms are thinking, hey, if we don't show up at the top of those pages, then we're dead. So we might as well design something that seduces the algorithm, hoping that then consumers would buy, right? And so we don't know much about that. And let me close by saying that the culture of the industry is terrible, okay? Let me summarize this by their motto, which is, do not ask for permission, ask for forgiveness, okay? So we're just going to, design an algo, put it in production, throw it out there, see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll ask for forgiveness. That's the way the industry has operated so far, and that's, hopefully why now we're thinking about guardrails, the AI Act being, one vivid incarnation of something that we did that is trying to discipline these players.
Okay, super interesting. So it's sort of, quite a mixed story from you. Sort of, you can kind of see the entry and the dynamism and dynamics, but you can also see sort of the new almost consumer protection issues that arise from some aspects of this technology, and how you kind of structure regulation and intervention against that backdrop. So that's super interesting. So now I wanted to kind of come to Hans. You've been waiting very, very patiently on the panel. So I wanted to come to you. I think similar question as I asked to Anna about, are there particular parts of the supply chain, bottlenecks that keep you up at night, but also more broadly, are there lessons from the Web 2.0 era that you think we should be learning or shouldn't be learning? And then I think a final sort of interesting question is, or at least for me, is how much competition is enough in this space? Because it feels like, look, there are scale economies here. We're not going to have hundreds of players. What if we have half a dozen big guys kind of duking it out? Like, is that a bad outcome? And how much do we care about the identity of those players? Like, do we need to see new faces, or are we okay as long as there is kind of sufficient competitive intensity from perhaps a group that includes existing players? So take it away.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for having me at this great conference. I should say the initial concern that bureaucrats don't know anything about technology in my case is really no problem, because I had ChatGPT write my intervention. Of course, I mean, your question involves a lot of prediction. We all know that prediction is difficult, especially when it concerns the future. And I think it's also fair to say that European prosperity was not built by bureaucrats predicting technological changes. So whatever I will say now, I say it with some great caution and being keenly aware that whatever I say may look quite stupid in a very short amount of time. I will start with your last questions, where you said how much competition is important. And because I think it's a relatively short answer. And the short answer is, I think what's important is competition in the open market, because all the big techs have the capabilities and have made the partnerships in order to ensure that they will have very good in-house provision of AI at a very high level. So from a regulatory perspective, for me, what remains important is how many people are out there selling it to independent downstream firms that can still disrupt. So that's the key point in my view. Otherwise, I mean, as a regulator on a panel, I feel almost like I'm expecting to paint some doomsday scenario of lots of monopoly, but I think, and I'll get to that, but I think it's also important to acknowledge at the beginning and sincerely acknowledge that this has been an incredibly competitive space, and a space, in fact, that has turned out so far a lot more competitive than most people who were on these panels a year or two ago would ever have imagined. And so in terms of sleepless nights, I'm not there yet that I have sleepless nights. And I think, when the wheel was invented 3,000 years ago, I don't think the right reaction would have been, to say, oh my God, what a huge problem that we're going to have. So I mean, of course, there's lots of exciting stuff. Emilio has mentioned that concentration in this market is not particularly high. It's going down quite a bit. ChatGPT had 50% share or something like this last year. This year, they're down to 33. There's 10 super well-financed big guys in there. There's OpenAI, there's Anthropic, there's Google, there's Meta, there's XAI, there's Microsoft, there's Amazon, and then you have the likes of Perplexity, Mistral, and so forth and so forth. So there is a lot of competition going on. And yet we have a situation where the standalone tools like LLMs by now almost feel like a commodity, where the product differentiation is really quite slim, despite still very, very intense and fast innovation cycles. So I think that's really quite remarkable. So I think when the business people talk about this, I think they mostly worry not about too much market power for now, but about the opposite, namely about how we're going to monetize this, given that variable costs are quite high compared to previous technological situations like with platforms. Network effects, as you said, so far at least, are not particularly pronounced. And of course, they're scaling up, but it seems that also, at least some of these guys may be running against diminishing returns, at least with the type of models that they're doing right now. And I think advertising is much harder to integrate, obviously, in AI than it was in the platform markets. When you had Google, for instance, Google could sell advertising very, very well as the thing that people were searching for, and then you click on the advertising, which is at the same time, the site that you want to visit. But that's really not the case in an LLM, where the output of the LLM is the product. You don't necessarily want to go to any particular web page, but you have the answer right there if the model is working well. And so it's perhaps not surprising that in finance there is a bit of a talk of a bubble even right now in terms of overinvestment to infrastructure and models, because clearly there's lots of people pouring a lot of capital into the infrastructure because there's enormous fear of missing out. And of course they ask themselves the question, should we spend another $1 billion in the next financing round to, be part of the eighth best foundation model? And these are important questions. So it's a bit different, I would say, than you had in the platform markets where, people operated according to Peter Thiel's motive or motto, which was 0 to 1. I mean, it's monopoly or nothing. And I'm not, predicting a bubble in AI. I'm a bureaucrat. What do I know? But I think at least historically, when you look at these highly disruptive industries, I think it is quite common to see, an initial period of overinvestment and speculative overkill. That was the case in the railways, 1850s, huge overinvestment, nobody made money. It was the same in cars, in the US there were more than 200 manufacturers of cars alone, and 3 made it, more or less. Same with nuclear energy or, 1990s telecoms bubble, huge overinvestment. Now, these overinvestment infrastructure was later very, very useful. It's not that it's overinvested in the sense that there is no social use for it, but has not always been a source of market power. When market power in these markets came in past technological waves, sure enough, it did come in many of those industries, but when it came, it was usually quite a bit later after this sort of period of overinvestment, namely once people had finally figured out what are the use cases that you can actually make consistent money with, and what is the sort of product differentiation that sets you apart from your rivals in ways that are different than what sets apart ChatGPT from Claude, for example. And then when there was market power, I think often it was in ways that people did not fully predict at the point in time when there was this overinvestment, because, if we were able to perfectly predict what will be the market power, people would be pouring their money into this rather than trying to make number 11 LLM. So does this mean there is nothing to see here? Obviously not. I think Anna and Emilio have given already a super good sort of overview and nuanced overview of potential competition concerns that can be there. Some things I think are fairly obvious, like exclusivity on data. If you don't have to have differentiation in the model as such, you can differentiate with data. And of course, that can be potentially a tremendous problem when you have some big tech guys sitting there who are sitting on very proprietary and important data. Obviously, this is something to watch very, very closely, because that may well become an essential facility when we talk about AI competition in the future. Second of all, I think it's important to learn something from platforms, which we've learned the hard way, I would say, as regulator, and that is that looking at such a hyperdynamic industry from a static perspective, as if it were, old economy products, is not going to lead to a lot of success. So, in dynamic industries, what's a complement today may well be a substitute tomorrow, as disruptors go down the value chain. And so, we certainly shouldn't look at complementary mergers as necessarily being just something that drives efficiencies, but but instead you have the ecosystem problems potentially that were talked about before. And so I think that's very important. So if we're now looking at mergers like NVIDIA Run AI, which is at the Commission at the moment, 15 years ago, certainly nobody would have cared. Now such mergers are looked at very carefully. And then finally, some of the areas where I think the biggest regulatory concern is actually not the competition world, but is going far beyond that, and that's the impact on the sociological or political impact and the impact on our workforce, and all this may require quite significant regulation. And so when we speak even about the power of the platforms like Google or Facebook, I would say the biggest problem there is for the past technological wave, in my view, it's not the market power, because there's been tremendous innovation as well. The biggest power is not the market power, but really is the political and sociological impact that some of these platforms have had, with the potential for misinformation, polarization, and so forth. And of course, that's an even more important concern in case of AI. But it's not mainly a competition concern. Now, if this was here, a conference on the next world order, people would scream up and would say, how can you say that that competition is not the main dish? But I think, we have to just realize that, to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and we shouldn't fall into that fallacy. There are some things where you have to go beyond, and I think these sociological and political impacts, they go far beyond competition. In fact, I would argue that in many ways competition has made these things worse. If you think about, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, Cambridge Analytica, election meddling, Brexit, and so forth. At the time, Facebook had a monopoly, and in the meantime, I would say 8 years later, there's a lot of competition in this space. There's TikTok, there's Snapchat, there's X, there's YouTube Shorts, and so forth, and so forth. So there's a lot more competition, and now, did this lead to more wholesome information or to a less polarized electorate? I think that would be an exaggeration to say that. In many ways, the opposite has happened. Just a few days ago, the Constitutional Court of Romania has canceled the Romanian presidential election because of alleged Russian interference via TikTok. And I mean, it's a crazy story. So it's still weeks before the election. This guy that had 33%. Nobody knew the guy. He was not on television. He was not campaigning. The pollsters didn't have him on the list. It was like they didn't take polls for the guy because, nobody knew the guy. And the only people who knew the guy knew him for making, for denying the moon landing and things like that, believe it or not, that's apparently still a thing on TikTok, and I guess on X it probably is too. So if you've seen Elvis or have credible information that he may still be out there, I suggest you run for president in your own country. What I'm trying to say is that, if anything, competition in this space seems to have eroded what little decency was left even further. And so, if we want to regulate this, and I think we have to regulate it so we don't kill each other, I think, we have to look beyond competition, because otherwise we'll not, manage to understand what's the actual source of these problems. Thank you.
Great stuff. So, yeah, again, a sort of question of where antitrust fits within a kind of broader set of questions for policy. So, conscious of time, but we're going to have our quick fire round. But first of all, Anna, I wanted to just give you a quick opportunity to talk about AI partnerships, the issues that are raised there. A complicated issue, you could probably spend an hour on it, but you've got about 3 or 4 minutes, so take it away.
In 3 or 4 minutes, I think it's not surprising the sheer number of partnerships that we have been seeing emerging. There are hundreds, those that are accounted for, of course. And why is it so understandable? Because in a scenario where you have some startups, and on the one hand, and where you have, on the other hand, firms that have key access to either inputs or distribution channels, it's not surprising that there's a lot of incentives to try to do matchmaking in between these two. Now, from a competition policy perspective, why is this relevant? Because they might be mergers in disguise, or because they may entail exclusivity that may give rise to competition concerns. You have these partnerships across the whole inputs, With cloud computing, those are the most high profile. You have Amazon, Google, and Microsoft going into partnerships with Mistral, OpenAI, Cohere, Stability AI. That isn't surprising, of course, given all the incentives that these startups have to try to secure access to compute, and reportedly the multi-billion dollar investment by Microsoft in OpenAI has been paid off with computing time or computing credits in Microsoft Azure. And of course, some of these partnerships have been assessed by either the Commission or the CMA or the Bundeskanzleramt or by all of them. In none of these cases, a competition agency concluded that there was a relevant merger situation that was covered by the thresholds. Of course, the key issue there is to assess whether the partnership, even not involving the acquisition of a controlling stake, might give rise to de facto control because of the economic dependency that the AI developers might have on the cloud computing provider. Now, at the same time, there have been relevant developments concerning the labor markets, with the famous acquihires, or reverse acquihires. If you search in the net, there's a bunch of them happening right now. I think I felt a moment of happiness to see that our legal tools have been capable to recognize a merger when you're in face of a merger, right? So the Commission has stated that the acquisition or the hiring of staff under certain circumstances may qualify as a merger. And whenever our tools adjust to the incentives and to the behaviors and the strategies of the firms in the market, that's a good outcome. If you search in the industry, the way that firms refer to these acquihires is not as acquihires or reverse acquihires, but Nadella variations, because of Satya Nadella's incursion into Inflection, the CEO of Microsoft, into Inflection, and they are described as very brilliant strategies to go around the regulatory hurdles of a full-scale merger while still acquiring the firm. And I think it's good news that we were able to qualify this as mergers.
Okay, so I think there's a interesting sort of debate around that in terms of how you differentiate between when you're just trying to get the assets just to get a person versus a firm. We could spend some time on that, and I think there's some interesting stuff in the CMA decision looking at the motivations of that hiring. But I want to just, conscious of time, just a couple of minutes left. There's so much we could discuss, and so I want to kind of channel my inner 30 million parameter large language model. I want to kind of distill as much information out of you guys in the most energy efficient way possible. So we're going to do quick fire round. I want rapid reactions, ideally one-word answers, but let's see where we get to. First question, I'll start with Maxime and we'll just work across. So is AI going to disrupt or entrench big tech?
So I have to confess something. I actually asked this question to ChatGPT this morning in preparation for the panel. Nowadays I ask all the questions to get a starting point. And interestingly enough, like it's often does ChatGPT didn't want to take a side. He was arguing for both. Yeah. And then I started prompting back and forth and infusing some bias. I say, I think I'm a competition lawyer. I care about those topics from a competition standpoint. And at the end, ChatGPT was claiming that it's going to entrench. And the three main reasons were data dominance, infrastructure and resources, and network effects. All three that we mentioned before.
Okay, interesting. More than one word, but excellent answer. So, Emilio. You can say both if you want to cop out, but
I'm not going to answer.
Okay. Anna?
I'm less confident now that it will lead to disruption than what I was earlier. So I think we might be leaning towards entrenchment.
I think both, and I think the disruption will be there if we allow an open market for foundation models.
Okay, so second, which firm is best placed to profit in the AI economy? Again, one-word answer.
I want to believe that this firm doesn't exist yet. It will be something that's going to pop up next year that we don't know.
Microsoft.
Depends on the... So in the short term, NVIDIA, also because of the overhead costs for the AI developers with cloud computing. But I think in the future, we might have one of these generative AI models that is integrating upstream and downstream, dominating the market, monetizing through ad, as OpenAI has advertised that it's thinking about doing it. So I think in the future, maybe a dominant Gen AI model.
Well, if one believes in the efficient market hypothesis, it must be NVIDIA based on valuations, but I have no idea.
Okay, so very final question to wrap up. Will we still be having conference panels on generative AI in 2 years' time?
2 years, yes. 10 years, I'm not sure.
Definitely yes.
Anna?
Well, I think we are going to be having panels probably on AGI, right? Which is something of the strong AI. Maybe that's the future.
I think at some point we will stop calling it AI because it will just be included in all the technologies.
Cool. Well, that was more rapid. We got better as we went on, I think. So I'd like to, everyone, thank our panel and let's all have a drink.